Welcome to the Inspired Living with Autoimmunity podcast, the podcast for high achievers who want to stay sharp, focused, and full of energy despite their diagnosis. With your host, National Board Certified Functional Medicine Health Coach, Julie Michelson, where Julie helps you take your power back from autoimmunity. And now here's your host, Julie Michelson.
Welcome back to the Inspired Living with Autoimmunity podcast. I'm your host, Julie Michelson, and today we're joined by Margaret Floyd Barry, functional nutritionist, writer, and real food advocate, and we're talking about food sensitivities and autoimmunity. Through Restorative Wellness Solutions, Margaret trains fellow practitioners the proven system she uses to get her clients life-changing results, and she's sharing that knowledge with us today. I'm so excited to share our conversation with you as it has the power to truly allow you to heal. Margaret, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to chat.
I am thrilled that you're here. Full disclosure, before we hit record, was telling you how excited I am for our topic today. Anybody that knows me in real life knows that this is something I talk about all the time. So I can't wait to dig in and let's talk about this connection of food sensitivities and autoimmunity.
Absolutely. Let's do it.
Yes. So let's, why are we even talking about food sensitivities? Like, what is the importance? Why do people, anyone with autoimmunity, or I would say really any kind of inflammation going on, why do they need to know about food sensitivities?
Well, you just said the key word, which is inflammation. And I know that your audience is super well-versed in autoimmunity, but I do want to I want to explain the way I think about autoimmunity, because I think it's I have a very sort of simple, probably oversimplified way of thinking about it, but it helps to kind of bring it all together, which is, that we know that our immune system has essentially two jobs, right? It's protecting us from pathogens and it's doing internal housekeeping. And as part of these jobs, it has this really important mechanism of distinction and differentiation, basically, of being able to differentiate between self and other and between friend and foe. And we know that what autoimmunity is at its root is a failure of this mechanism, where now it is attacking friendly self in a way that it would enemy foe. Right. And it's making some kind of sort of misfiring. It's actually the distinction mechanism has gone awry for some reason. And so the question when you're addressing this from a functional perspective is why? And another sort of oversimplified, but I think helpful analogy is to think about this. The immune system is a very, very sophisticated, wise mechanism. And yeah, if we are constantly taxing it and engaging it, then it will, kind of like any of us, like, I don't know about you, but I know for me that when I am not getting a break and I am go, burning the candles at both ends, I start to make bad decisions, right? And essentially at its most basic, what's happening in an autoimmune disease is that immune system is being constantly engaged. It's being just worked all the time, such that it's starting to make quote unquote bad decisions. And so the question is, what is taxing the immune system? What is keeping it so busy? And inflammation is a process managed by the immune system and essential to it. So anything that is driving inflammation in our body is going to be engaging that immune system. Now, food sensitivities are, by definition, as we ingest a food that should really be harmless, right? But we ingest a food and it's triggering some kind of inflammatory process in the body. And the thing with food sensitivities is that, there's an important distinction. Food sensitivities versus food allergies versus like a food intolerance, like a lactose intolerance. So, a food allergy, just to geek out on the immune system component, it's IgE. So it's mediated by IgE antibodies. And the thing with this is this reaction happens really quickly, right? Like you eat the peanuts, you break out in the hives, you eat the shellfish, you throw it up, right? Like there's not a
And
ton of
it's not a mystery,
right? Yeah, especially as we become adults, right? Kids a little bit less so because they're not exposed to things, they can't communicate what's going on as easily. But for adults at this point in our lives, most of us are really clear on foods that we get an immediate response with. And then the same kind of thing with food intolerances. And I realize the language of food intolerance, food sensitivity gets really kind of mishmashed, but let's talk about food intolerances and define them for the sake of this conversation as a lack of digestive capacity to actually break down a component of that food. So a classic example of this is a lactose intolerance, right? So the body does not produce the enzyme lactase that is required to digest the milk sugar lactose. And again, it doesn't take a lot of trial and error. Like people with lactose intolerance rarely are like confused by the fact that when they eat the ice cream or drink the glass of milk, that they have pretty significant and uncomfortable digestive symptoms shortly thereafter. Like it happens within the matter of for some people minutes, for some people hours, but it's quick, right?
And it's a digestive symptom.
Yes.
So it's easy to connect those
dots.
It's
easy to be like, ooh, that didn't sit well, right? Whereas a food sensitivity, it's complicated for a number of reasons. So there's multiple mechanisms within the body that trigger it, but it can also be delayed. And I think that's one of the most important and trickiest components when we're talking about food sensitivities is, here we are when we're recording this, we're talking on a Wednesday. We could have eaten something for lunch today on a Wednesday that doesn't actually elicit a response for 2 to 3 days. So by Saturday, I'm not thinking about what I ate today, right? And this is one of the reasons why elimination diets are so freaking challenging and make people want to rip out their hair is because it's like, I cannot figure out the correlations. And it's this delayed response that is so difficult. And it also, you can have foods that you are moderately sensitive to or mildly sensitive to where it's not like you eat them. And even if you had an immediate reaction, it might not be symptomatically that loud, but it's sort of like the steady, slow drip, right? Like the sort of Chinese water torture, it will really build symptoms over time.
Plus, there's usually multiple foods adding to the situation, which is part of the tricky part too. It's not like, oh, I have a food sensitivity. It usually by the time you have one, you have more, and I'm guessing we'll touch on that as well. So this is why this is such a passion point, and I love the different perspectives. This is why I actually love the elimination diet, but I love the proper reintroduction phase.
Yes.
And maybe we'll talk a little bit about that as we get into kind of, how you address this. And you touched on it before, but I see it all the time. So I have to highlight, we're not talking about, although there could be a sensitivity to an inflammatory food, we're not talking about the gluten, the dairy, the sugar, the things that we would, you could read a book and go take out on your own and know to look for. We're talking about, yes, those, but what I see all the time with people who've been on this journey a while, it's the healthy foods, it's the nutrient-dense foods, because they're trying to eat so well and be so healthy. So I'm excited to dig in further. I wasn't kidding before. This is making me so happy, this conversation. They really do need to understand. And even now I hear all the time, when I say, because I am personally sensitive to dairy, and people will say, oh yeah, I'm lactose intolerant. And I'm like, no, it's different. So you did such a good job explaining. I think, to me, the simple explanations are the best. And I love that the idea of like the decision fatigue, that our immune system is just it just loses precision. It really does.
It does.
Yeah. So we're leaning in. We're like, okay, I don't have gut symptoms, so I never really thought about food being a thing.
Right.
Walk us through. I know you have this amazing process. I'm guessing, since you're not a big fan of the elimination diet, that you like testing. Tell me, what do people do? How do you even explore, what you're sensitive to?
Well, I want to qualify that. So let's talk about
Yes.
elimination diets for a moment, because for
Yeah.
some people, particularly as a starting point, it can be
Yeah.
really, really helpful, right? Like, so I think, and to your point, we're not talking about the usual suspects here. So if you have autoimmune and you have not yet eliminated gluten, dairy, soy, sugar, and processed oils, okay, that's the starting point. You do
Yes.
that. For a lot
Yep.
of people, that's enough, right? I mean, you think about those things, I say them and it's like, oh, only 5 things. Every one of those is ubiquitous
Yes.
in the modern diet. So
Right.
that's
Well,
not a
because
small project.
then, but if you just
Just
eliminate those things, you're left with a real food diet,
exactly.
right? So we're at this point now, we're avoiding, the clearly, obviously inflammatory processed foods and things. And you're right. Some people will do like even like a Whole30, and they have remarkable results. And I always am in awe that I was able to even start my healing journey now that I know like really what was underneath all of it. So just removing some of those things was at least enough for me to get my brain working again so I could investigate further.
Well, it's removing a really significant inflammatory burden. And, to your point, even in the absence of digestive symptoms, if we're thinking about what triggers an immune and an inflammatory response, if we're eating, for most people, multiple times a day, foods that are unknowingly triggering that inflammatory response. Now, inflammation, yes, in some cases we can feel it, and it really depends a little bit on your sort of constitutional weakness. So if your constitutional weakness is like in your joints, then inflammation for you might be like sore joints, sore elbows and wrists and toes and fingers, right? Like that can definitely be where you feel it. But inflammation is not always for every person. It's something that you overtly feel in a creaky body. That's one manifestation. And for some people, it can appear as headaches. For some people, it can appear as skin issues. For some people, it can appear as joints. But for some people, it's a lot more silent symptomatically, which in many ways is actually more dangerous because there isn't something sort of yelling. Like people, sometimes will be like, I hate that whenever I eat this food, my body does this. And I'm like, well, I get that. It's annoying, but it's actually your body's communicating to you really loudly and really clearly that when you do X, Y happens. And now you have very clear information about what doesn't work. Now, what you do with that information is up to you. But it's communicating very clearly. It's when it's subtler, it's under the surface. And we know that inflammatory processes can be at work long before you feel anything amiss in your body symptomatically. That's actually where real trouble can start. So it's important to remember, we think about what are the things that are taxing that immune system that are causing that decision fatigue. And if we're eating foods that are creating an inflammatory or triggering an inflammatory process in our body every day, multiple times a day, right there, that is a very, very significant burden on the immune system. So even just picking out those really overtly pro-inflammatory foods that are inflammatory in everybody is going to be a really big step in the right direction.
Absolutely.
And then you take it to that next level of like, let's now look at an elimination diet. So I'm not going to consider those, the sort of the usual suspects an elimination diet. I realize that for some people that does feel like an elimination diet, but that's really just taking out the heavy hitters. But thinking of an elimination diet, there's different strategies, whether it's autoimmune protocol, whether it is the Walls diet, whether, there's different ways that you can go about this, the GAPS diet. I've seen all of these things used. And for some people, very successfully. And that's now taking a whole other layer of foods out that in many people, not in all people, but in many people are going to trigger that inflammatory process or be challenging on the digestion. And I think that's actually an important additional piece here because we know that 80% of the immune system lives in and around the gut. If you're eating something that stresses your digestion, which again, you might not feel symptomatically, that is going to be a stressor on the immune system as well. So that's a really beautiful way that these elimination diets can be a really good next step. My clientele tend to come to me having been on these for a while and still feeling miserable. And this is where I think the value of testing comes in, because what can happen is that someone's on a very restrictive diet and can start to be afraid of eating a lot of things.
Yes.
And they still don't feel right. And
Right.
likely they're avoiding foods they could be eating while still eating foods that are triggering inflammation. And you mentioned, this can be healthy foods. I mean, I've seen things as apparently innocuous as lettuce,
many
cashews,
types of lettuces.
right? Or
Yeah.
turmeric. I mean, that's a big one. The number of people that I've seen with turmeric,
Me,
right?
after years of pounding turmeric.
Right. It's now become,
Yeah.
it's now doing the opposite in your body and your,
Yeah.
based on your bio individuality in this moment. And so it's hard to figure that out with a true elimination, unless you're to go to, and even this, I know some people will go all the way to like a carnivore diet or an animal-based diet where they're really dramatically limiting consumption. And as you say, the key to this is a really systematic, slow reintroduction process, which is hard for a lot of people to do properly.
Yeah. And
so
I take the same perspective as you, as far as I always say, we want to be on the most varied, nutrient dense diet that supports our body, which is going to look different. And I will say, I'm a huge fan. I mean, you name a program and I'm trained in it, and a huge fan of, if you look at these protocols that have like a standard kind of, eat this, don't eat that, they're all very similar in that they're all paleo.
Yeah.
They're all high fat, low carb. There are really parts and pieces that there's such an overlap between them. And then there's these little nuances that are different. I am an AIP coach. It's very restrictive.
It is.
And I believe 100% across the board. And again, it could be because by the time people are finding me and they've tried stuff on their own. But these are the people that are sensitive to spinach and, lettuce and broccoli and things that they're eating on the but they're avoiding all this other stuff. So I used to, in the beginning, if someone wasn't getting the results I thought they, was expecting, we would test. And if you're working with me, we're testing right away. I mean, it just doesn't, who wants to wait to heal? We don't want to wait.
No, we don't at all. And I think, I agree with everything that you're saying. And I think that important pieces to recognize too is that alongside identifying and removing those foods that are sensitivities in your body, a really important piece is to do the digestive healing that allowed those food sensitivities to develop in the first place.
Right.
And that's one of the things that I think one of the main critiques of food sensitivity testing is this process that, and I've seen it, I've seen clients come in who've done a food sensitivity test in isolation. They've taken out the foods that come back on that test. They feel better for a bit. And then they haven't done anything else other than remove this list of foods. And then the symptoms start to slowly creep back in. And a few months later, they're right back to where they started with. And they're like, I don't understand. And so they do another test. And sometimes it's different foods or an even more restricted list. And the list of their foods gets shorter and shorter and shorter. And so they're testing and they're removing the foods, and they feel better for a little bit, but it's almost like they sort of start to their tolerance for actually consuming a variety, as you say, is so vitally important to be able, we're not in the business of creating restrictive diets. We're in the business of creating as much food freedom as we can while healing. And so without addressing that underlying mechanism, which is fundamentally a leaky gut and intestinal permeability, then you're not going to get anywhere. So, when it comes to testing, we use a really, really specific approach. And that is, I never do food sensitivity testing in isolation, and I never do gut testing in isolation. Always do the two together, because what the gut testing will tell us is what's going on in the digestive tract, which is vitally important information, regardless of whether somebody is presenting with digestive symptoms, because of the fact, especially when we're talking about autoimmunity, because of the fact that the vast majority of the immune system lives in and around the digestive tract. It's just the proximity. I mean, something is happening, anything off in the digestion is necessarily impacting the immune system. So those two, you just have to address it. And with testing, the thing about symptoms, assuming there are symptoms, is that, like, let's just take a super simple presentation of somebody's constipated. Great. Why? Right? Is it that they have a hidden food sensitivity? Possibly. Is it that they have, digestive function issues? They're not secreting enough hydrochloric acid, or they've got a little bit of, sludgy bile, and they're not digesting their fats properly.
PPI for years.
Maybe they've been on a
have
PPI
no idea,
for years.
it's connected to
right. They have
motility.
some kind of, maybe they have a fungal overgrowth. Maybe they have some kind of, maybe they have an H. pylori infection. Maybe they have ... There's so many different factors that can be the underlying
they're not drinking
cause.
enough water.
It could be something that simple, right? And yet, without testing, without sort of looking under the hood, we are left at guessing. And the way that we address and correct those imbalances is very different depending on what the root cause of that situation actually is. And so we use the stool testing to help us look under the hood, like see what's actually going on so that we understand how to correct it very specifically and strategically. And then alongside that, we're using a food sensitivity test. And we'll talk about the different types of tests here. But we use a very specific one that is telling us what foods are driving inflammation in the system. So we're actually very specific that we don't use a lot of the IgG, IgM, like the antibody tests. We actually don't use those because for a number of reasons. So I've opened the door, so I guess I'll walk through it. The thing with antibody tests is that, let's take an IgG test, for example. Elevations in IgG antibodies are not always directly correlated with elevations in inflammation as the result of ingesting that food, right? And that's one of the reasons why a lot of IgG tests have started adding in additional immune markers. So they're not only looking for the elevation in the antibody, which is just the immune system tagging the antigen or the food, saying it's the enemy, right? So it's tagging that, saying it shouldn't be here. We need to deal with it. But that isn't always directly correlated with the level of inflammation. So some of these tests have added on like complement or other different aspects of the immune system to assess whether this elevation in antibodies is correlated with an elevation in inflammation. So that's definitely a huge step in the right direction. And if you do antibody testing, I'm a big believer in those tests that add on that additional piece. The challenge is that not all food sensitivity reactions involve antibodies. So necessarily, you're missing a category of food sensitivities. These food sensitivities that are, and these tend to be, they're cell mediated. So they happen inside the cell. It's an elevation of T cells and phagocytes right within the cell that are just causing that reaction. No antibody involvement at all. And often these are the types of reactions that are delayed. And so when you're only testing the mechanism, then you're necessarily missing these cell mediated responses. So the test we use, and I know that it's controversial. Some people love it, some people hate it, and the haters are loud. So if you go Googling this test, you're going to find a lot of people totally dissing it. But I really do want to emphasize we use it in a very specific way. So it's the mediator release test. So it's the test that's looking at the endpoint. It's looking for evidence of inflammation as a result of the ingestion of a given food. Now, it's also, if you've heard of the LCAT, it's not the precursor. It's
predecessor.
No, it's the LCAT is its predecessor.
Okay.
But I don't know how to say that in the reverse. Sorry. I'm trying to come up with a word that I'm sure exists, but I can't think of it right now. So LCAT is the MRT's predecessor. It was founded by the same scientists. And so the MRT is just more recent technology. So the key, though, is that we never use it in isolation, ever. So we always do it alongside a stool test. And another key is that removing those foods identified as inflammatory by that test, that's not a forever thing. That's right. A temporary thing, right? That's while we do the healing in the digestive tract. And as I said earlier, the goal is not a restrictive diet. As you beautifully said, it's a varied diet. It's the most diverse the most full, abundant diet we can come to. I mean, yes, there's probably going to be some things your body just gives a hard no. And I'm going to say gluten's at the top of that list.
Sure. If you've, I mean, we can,
It's just
that's
the
a
way it goes.
whole
other
nother
conversation.
episode on gluten and leaky gut. But if you're at a place where you have leaky gut, gluten is never going to be your friend. And if you have any
It's not.
autoimmunity, gluten's never going to be your friend. It's just not.
I don't know that
That's
gluten's
not
anybody's friend.
anybody's friend.
I was gonna say, I don't know that it's anybody's friend.
Yeah,
I think that like it's a hard, that's a,
it's a hard stop where I always the qualifier I say, because people love to say, well, what's the ideal diet? Well, it's individualized, except nobody should eat gluten.
Yeah, that's the one thing. If I was to rule the world, I would just eliminate gluten.
It'd just be gone. Exactly.
Make life simpler for everybody.
Okay, so you're testing sensitivities, you're doing the stool test to identify the underlying cause.
You bet.
And then you're eliminating the foods that
we pull them out temporarily. The way that I describe it is, think about if you had like a big old cut on your arm, okay, and you're doing all the things, all the healing balms, all the things, but then every day, multiple times a day, you take that open wound and you rub it along a brick wall, right? It's going to slow down the healing process. You might get there, but it's going to take a heck of a lot longer, and you could make it a lot worse.
Really thick scar by the time you're done,
right? It's terrible. So really, what we're doing is we're removing the brick wall. The food sensitivities are the things that are irritants. They're triggering inflammation, and they're working against the healing process. Right. So we use the stool test to inform what we're doing in terms of the healing process. And then we remove one of these blocking factors, because if you're continuing to consume inflammatory foods, that's absolutely going to get in the way of the healing process. So we're pulling those out temporarily, and the time is anywhere between, sort of depends on the degree of sensitivity and the degree of a reaction to a food. But it's going to be between 3 to 6 months typically. So this is not a forever thing. And I think back to way back in the day, long before I changed careers and moved into the field of nutrition, I struggled with a really, really bad case of eczema, which I'd had since I was in my teens.
Well, and I'm laughing. Literally, this is how excited I was to talk about this.
Yeah.
You can, every episode I've ever recorded, we start with, my first question should have been, Margaret, how did you get into this world? What is your story? But I was so excited to talk about the food sensitivities that I just got way ahead of myself. So that's such a big one, eczema and food.
It was awful. It was awful. And I had it everywhere. I mean, I would just anyone who hasn't had it, I remember my dermatologist described it as an itch that rashes, but the itch, oh my God, it's just it makes you just go insane. And I had, at the time I did not eat, gluten. That was the staple of everything that I did. I remember, I basically, my doctor gave me cortisone cream, and it would kind of keep things under control. Not really. And I remember I was in my mid-20s, and I started getting it in my eyes. And it was I would my eyelids, and I could scratch my eyelids, and the skin was getting into my eyes, and I had to go to the eye doctor because I was having all these eye infections. It was so bad. And the doctor was like, well, here's a higher dose of steroids or the cortisol cream. And I remember being like, that doesn't seem like a good idea. I didn't know very much about this, but instinctively I was like, am I going to burn my eyelids off? This doesn't feel right. It's not working. And, this was, I said, mid-20s. And I was living up in Canada at the time. And a very dear friend of mine was really into this sort of natural, weird stuff in my mind. And she said, oh, have you ever thought of going to see a naturopath? And I was like, what's that? And so she recommended this person. And I laughed and I said, oh, she's going to take away all my favorite food groups of coffee and wine and cheese and chocolate. And had it only ended there. Right. So I went to work with this woman, and we did some testing and the list of foods. Now, what I will say, either I didn't hear it, which is highly possible, or she didn't mention this was a temporary thing. Because I remember I went home with this list of foods that I was not supposed to eat and thought this was forever.
For the rest of your life.
And I just cried. I thought, this is, it was, there was so
why
many.
Bother?
Why bother? Why eat? Can I just get a feeding tube? The whole thing. And I loved food. I love to eat. I love to cook. So I was devastated. But here's the deal. A, it wasn't forever. And B, within 3 weeks, that eczema went away. And I'm now 48 and it has never come back.
Isn't that
amazing? I mean, I was like, what? That was the moment where my eyes were like, oh, wide open to the fact that what you eat. I mean, I never thought that something I ate would have anything to do with my skin. The two seemed completely and utter. I mean, I could kind of calculate, like, I eat a thing, my stomach hurts. Like, yeah, that makes sense. But eat a thing, get itchy, and turn into a rash. Those things did not connect.
Well, and like you said, when it becomes this ongoing,
totally,
it's my favorite client story. They're all my favorite, but I was working with a client. It was 2020. I can remember for obvious reasons. But when I first met with her, she was referred from her functional medicine doc, and she was not referred for eczema. We're in our consultation, and I was kind of giving her, my approach, and we were talking about, what she thought she was seeing me for, and what were her goals. And she mentioned kind of in passing, she was 72. At the time. And she mentioned, I've had eczema since I was 2. And I said to her, well, when we do these things for the stuff your doctor's really concerned about, I'm pretty sure we're going to figure out what's triggering your eczema. And she looked at me like I was insane, and from another planet, and which I understood. And sure enough, it was corn. It was corn. Yeah. So at 72, she got rid of her eczema.
Oh my gosh. Wow. That makes me want to cry. I mean, I just think of all of those years that she was suffering without needing to.
Well, and that again, that's like another, episode of my poor oldest had a GI specialist from the time he was an infant. Nobody ever said, what am I eating when I was nursing, or what is he, what is he eating as a toddler? And that's a direct, the poor kid couldn't keep food down. But so, wow. So when you experience the power yet simplicity that food and can have on health, it's like, well, the world needs to know about this.
Yeah, completely. I mean, it took me a few years to get there from a career perspective. Now, I should also share, since we're, sort of talking personal story, and one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about autoimmune, because at the time I didn't realize that there was an autoimmune component to eczema, which of course now we know there is. But my mom had very, very severe autoimmune. She had both lupus as well as rheumatoid arthritis, as well as multiple other things. But it was really awful. I had a front row seat to really what doesn't work in terms of medical management of autoimmune, because the strategy was 100% to dramatically downregulate her immune system overall. Yeah. And to, and just load her up on anti-inflammatories, steroidal, really, really intense doses, and then operate, just start taking things out as needed. Yeah. And it was so brutal. She started it. She basically, over the course of 20 years, it was just this slow process of degradation. And in some ways, she was a medical miracle, right? Like, these drugs were keeping her going. They were allowing her some quality of life, not much, but some. But it was this really painful process of 1 step forward, 3 steps back, 1 step forward, 2 steps back, 2 steps forward, 5 steps back. I mean, it was just awful. And she ultimately lost her life to complications and side effects from the very medications that were keeping her alive. Oh, and so sorry. Thank you. I know I had already changed careers to pursuing nutrition. And the reason why I learned about this testing and started diving into this deeper work was because the clients, like my mom, who were just so sick. I mean, I just knew there had to be a better way. I didn't believe that this should be her fate. Now, so I was already working as a practitioner when she passed, and, was she that open to doing this kind of work? No, but I mean, she was also sick at a time. I can remember when she was first diagnosed, she started bringing home all these books about AIDS. And I was like, I was a teenager at the time, and I was like, why are you getting that? And she was like, well, they think that if they find a solution to AIDS, that because AIDS is shutting down the immune system and autoimmune diseases, the immune system going crazy, that, like, they sort of thought it was like the reverse. Like, that's how early in this whole process it was. Yeah. So the information that she had and was working with was so so limited compared to our understanding of what's the mechanisms at play now. But
unfortunately, though, which is why we're having this conversation and sharing it, somebody going to a rheumatologist and getting diagnosed today, unfortunately, is being told the same thing that she was told and that I was told, which is that you can't heal, and all we can do is try to slow things down, manage pain, slow down symptoms, try to prolong death.
Well, here's the deal, is this process that I'm describing, you know, my whole practice, I specialize in autoimmune, and the things that we're talking about, sometimes we have to get a little bit, there's a lot of different things can stress the immune system.
Of course.
I will tell you that healing the gut, identifying and removing inflammatory foods, for some people, it's 100% of the process. It literally, that takes you across the finish line. And for the vast majority, it's a really significant part of the process, 80 to 90%. You've seen super, super complicated, like myasthenia gravis, POTS, these really, really complex autoimmune processes that everyone is telling them, no hope.
Yeah.
Doing something this simple has been the key to transforming and really reversing those, the errant immune system, like reversing that decision fatigue so that the immune system can do what it's supposed to do. It's a powerful, really important process and really simple at root. I think that's part of it. I don't know. I have theories about this, but I sometimes wonder if it's just so simple that it's like, I can't be, or we need to make it more complicated. I don't know what it is. I'm making stuff up at this point, but it is simple, and
it's
powerful.
Simple when you have experienced it and when you understand it. And, because we both encounter people all the time who just have a hard time believing, like you said, could it really be that simple? And I want to highlight what you said about, yes, it's most likely, or often, it's not just food, but the body is resilient, and all of these inflammatory hits that we take are cumulative. And so, like you said, we're eating 3, sometimes more, sometimes, whatever, hopefully mostly daily, unless you're fasting. But so this is where your immune system is in your gut. So it's a piece that, even if it's, like you said, only 80 or 90% and not 100%, it's enough to really move the needle. And like I said, I'm always amazed now that I know what other drivers I had going on, that literally just changing my diet at the time was enough to change my life and get me off my medications. And, sometimes you do need to heal more than that at once to get the results. You, not only are you helping directly your clients that come to you with autoimmunity, but you train practitioners as well. Which I'm so excited about, because as we were just mentioning, like, we need more people we do understanding this approach. And so tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So the company is called Restorative Wellness Solutions. And its original founder, Anne Fisher Silva, was actually one of my main mentors. I actually took the very inaugural class that she ever did back in 2014. And it's where I learned how to use this particular combination of tests, how to use the combination of the stool test strategically with the MRT, how to use the information from that to provide and craft a really effective, powerful protocol that is just such an incredibly important starting point for every healing journey. We're talking about autoimmune, but as you said at the opening of this, any process that involves inflammation, which is every chronic disease process, this is a really vital starting point. And I was at the point in my practice when I came to RWS to take that first class, I was at a point in my practice where I was actually considering not doing any one-on-one work anymore, because I was frustrated, because these clients that were sick, like my mom, and I'd get them to a certain point, but then I couldn't get them past that. Like, I could never take them to the finish line. And these were the clients, and this is probably part of my energy around the elimination diets, is because these were clients that were doing everything right.
Yeah.
They were on the elimination diets. They were taking all the quote unquote right supplements. They were doing the sleep hygiene. They were meditating. They were like all the things. Like you want to check a box of like the wellness to-do list. They were doing it all and they felt awful. And I was like, I don't know what else to say. Like I did not know how to look under the hood effectively. And I'd done different trainings with individual labs and things, but this was the first program that brought it all together into a specific methodology and a process for me to apply. And it changed everything. I mean, there were clients where I'd gotten stuck and I went back to them to be like, hey, I've got a whole new set of tools. I think we can get further. And we did. Like it would be, the client, I'd got them 70, 80%. Now we were like crossing that finish line. Right. And that was really powerful. So that was back in 2014. And I quickly became an instructor alongside Anne and then joined her in the company. And actually just earlier this year, she's actually decided to move on. This is now her legacy, and she has passed the company into my hands. Quite a privilege to be able to take this and fly with it. So, it's really, it's one thing to be able to impact people individually, but I've realized, as she did, the reason why she created this company originally is that she couldn't have the impact that she wanted to with herself and her practice. And she had this long wait list and was looking around at other practitioners going like, why aren't they getting these results? Why aren't they having the wait list? And so she just decided to train others to do what she did. And so that is what we do. It's a 4-tiered curriculum. So each course is 12 weeks long. And we just do a really deep dive into how to use these additional tests to get really strategic to identify, like, how can we customize that diet beyond a generic protocol, particularly when that protocol is not working. So how do we get hyper specific to what's causing inflammation in your body? Because I can guarantee what causes it in your body is different from mine, which is different from my husband's, which is different from my kids, right? Like it's every one of us. It's totally unique. And it's hard to identify, if not impossible to identify, when you're talking beyond the basic elimination diets. It's really challenging to figure these things out. And so without testing, so being able to do that testing just allows for a degree of customization and accuracy with both the diet as well as with the supplement protocols. Because I mean, there's some phenomenal supplements out there, but if you don't know
which ones you need,
right? Like you could just take either tons of all sorts of stuff you don't need or miss the mark completely. So, it's an honor. We've got almost 1,000 practitioners now in 15 countries around the world certified in using these tools. So, if some of this approach really resonates with you, what I would recommend is the website restorativewellnesssolutions.com. There's a find a practitioner link, and you'll find practitioners in different states and around the world. And if you happen to be a practitioner and are thinking about additional training, I would encourage you to think about this, because I can speak for myself and many of the students who've gone through our programs that it has really revolutionized the way that I practice and the kind of clinical results that I get, to the point, people say, oh, is it a business class? Is it marketing? Well, we don't specifically teach you marketing, but here's the thing. When you get really outstanding results, as I know that you've experienced this as well, your clients, happy clients, are the best marketing asset you could ever possibly hope for. And oftentimes, we have some alumni who have just finished our entry-level program, which is where we teach all the gastrointestinal healing, and who are like, I haven't even built a website and I have a wait list. So, great results is the really, Anne always says results refer, and I could not agree more. It's one of the most important marketing strategies you can have, is to just be phenomenal at what you do.
I am so thrilled that not only, are you sharing your wisdom with us, but I can hear, you did such a great job explaining why I've tried this, I've tried that, including possibly other food sensitivity testing, or even maybe even if it was the MRT, but that's the only piece you had. So guys, go to the website and find yourself a practitioner, because Margaret is shared some real gold, and hopefully it's connected the dots for people that feel like, I know you hear this all the time, I've tried everything.
Yes.
And I know it feels that way, but you've only tried what you've known to try, and having this kind of customized protocol is priceless, and as both of us can testify to, no matter where you are. You mentioned it earlier as far as complicated cases and where you are in your journey. I mentioned a 72-year-old client.
Right.
It's never too late to start to heal.
Yeah. Body is a magnificent healing machine.
It is.
Given the right tools.
Exactly. So what is, other than going to the website and finding a practitioner, what's one step that listeners can take today to start to improve their health?
That's a tough one because it so depends on where they're at in their thing. So
I know
I can't answer with an annoyingly vague, it depends. But here's what I would say. The audience is autoimmune. Likely folks have done this already, but here's what I'm going to say. I'm going to give an advanced and a beginner. Here's the beginner step. If you haven't done so already, kick gluten to the curb. And I'm not saying going low gluten. There's no such thing as low gluten.
No, sometimes gluten.
It's out, right? It's not I do it Monday to Saturday, and then Sunday I have a croissant with my daughter. Nope. It's out. And just say goodbye. And it's actually, do you know what? There's so much freedom in that. I know it sounds hard, but just being like, I don't eat that. First of all, there's all sorts of foods you probably shouldn't be eating anyways. They're just necessarily off the table. And it's easier to just say no to something than to say sometimes, because sometimes is a slippery slope. And it just really doesn't work. So if you've got any kind of autoimmune situation going on, you just need to say goodbye to gluten. And I know that's a big step. So for anyone who hasn't done that yet, that is your first step. If you've already done that, oh boy, I mean, there's so many different things that you could go into. But what I would do is, if you have already done that and you're not feeling great yet, I would take a minute and do a bit of an inventory and look at the different things that could be stressing your immune system. And even if you're not a practitioner, I think we also know some basics, right? Like we know that stress is very taxing on the immune system. Not getting enough sleep, really taxing on the immune system. Eating, I mean, we talked about the usual suspects: dairy, soy, so gluten, of course, but dairy, soy, processed sugar, and refined seed oils. If those are still in the diet, those are causing inflammation. Those are causing your immune system stress. So just kind of doing a bit of an inventory of what is still triggering and engaging that immune system, and then sort of slowly and systematically starting to correct those things. And it's going to look really different for every person. This is why it's really hard to answer the question of like, what's the one thing other than kick gluten to the curb? It is going to look really different from person to person.
Is, that is ideal, because often we just don't want to look. So if you take that moment, I find that one place to up level. Totally. What is the thing that I am ignoring that I know, oh my gosh, my sleep is not what it should be, or fill in the blank.
100%. I mean, I'll share personally, for me recently, sleep has been like my nemesis. And I will share that in the last few weeks, I've kind of figured it out. Right. And it's like, holy cow, the world is a better place when I'm well rested, like really, truly, deeply
I'm sure
restored
your
to
kids
sleep.
would agree.
Right? Oh, everybody would agree. Trust me. There's not an aspect of my life that poor sleep does not touch and good sleep does not improve.
Yes.
So, I mean, it's not something that this process doesn't end, right? Like, Julie, you and I are here. We've been doing this work for a really long time, and we're still constantly like assessing and fine tuning. It's just, health is not one of those things that you tick off the list and it's like, lifetime really accomplishments, like going to Hawaii. I also took care of my health. It just doesn't work that way, right? We have to keep our eye on it.
Yeah. So, and it does. It sounds so cliche. Health is a journey, but it is.
It is.
It's constantly, life is constantly changing, and we constantly need to be tweaking and adjusting and up leveling. And I don't know if you've found this. For me, it has been, if you asked me 2 years ago how I felt, I would say, I feel amazing and I can't believe I could feel this well. And then every 6 months, if you ask me that question, I'll have it just
keeps getting better.
I can't think of like, it would be good if only. Like, I feel great. And then when I look over my shoulder, I'm like, wow, I feel even better than I did 6 months ago, a year ago.
It's always my goal for clients is I want them to feel better than they even can dream possible right now.
Yes.
And to forget how bad it felt. I always also tell clients there's going to be a moment when you're like, why am I eating this weird diet? Why am I taking all these supplements? And that's actually the time where we have to like, it kind of gets hardest because you're thinking, I feel great. I don't know why I'm
Right.
doing all these things. And oftentimes that's the moment they slip, but then things come back and they realize
And they
and they go back
remember.
into the habits. But yeah, that's my goal is for all clients and for, all of your listeners is to get to that place where you're sort of like, wow, I had no idea I could feel this good. And I don't even really remember what that felt like, because that's possible. For every single person, that's possible. I don't believe that there's, I haven't yet seen the person where that's just truly, absolutely an impossibility. Sometimes it's hard work. I'm not going to pretend it's easy, but it's there for you.
I love it. Margaret, thank you so much. You have shared amazing gold with us today.
Oh, you're so welcome. Thank you so much for having me. It's been great hanging out.
For everyone listening, remember, you can get the show notes and transcripts by visiting inspiredliving.show. I hope you had a great time and enjoyed this episode as much as I did. I will see you next week.
Thank you for listening to Julie Michelson's Inspired Living with Autoimmunity. Did you enjoy this episode? Please like, share, and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. If you'd like to get a transcript of this and every other episode, just head on over to inspiredliving.show or click on the link in this episode's description. There, you can also find everything we discussed in this episode, including links and information about our guest. You can even send in your questions to be answered by Julie in a future episode. That's inspiredliving.show. Until next time, this is Julie Michelson's Inspired Living with Autoimmunity podcast, helping you take your power back.